welcome to Mission Critical Conversations. I'm your host for today, Michele Dawn Mooney. Organizations that weather periods of disruption most effectively are those that are prepared before challenges arise. Increasingly, that preparation includes executive protection, not simply as a security function, but as part of a broader strategy to protect reputation, support business continuity, and strengthen organizational resilience. My guest today is Rowe, a principal in security risk and resilience at the Chertoff Group, where he leads executive protection and special events security. And before joining the private sector, Ron spent more than 25 years with the U.S. Secret Service and brings decades of experience protecting senior leaders and managing complex security operations. Ron, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Michele. It's great to be with you.
So, Ron, you spent 26 years in the U.S. Secret Service, rising through the ranks and retiring as acting director. So, can I ask you what drew you to public service in the first place? And how did that decision shape the way you think about protecting business executives today?
Public service is it's a vocation. It's a calling. It's something that at a very young age, I knew that's what I wanted to do with my life. And fortunately, here at the Chertoff Group, even, I've left government service, but I'm still continuing to do that same mission of protecting people, helping organizations deal with complex challenges, and then developing and working, with them to come up with solutions for some of these complex threat with the complex threat environment that we live in today.
And so, given that you've worked across both government and private sectors, how is corporate executive protection similar to what you did in the Secret Service? And then on the flip side, how does it differ?
So it always comes down to people, processes, and technologies, and it's about keeping your principals safe. What I've seen in my time here with the Chertoff Group is that the private sector is also dealing with some of the same challenges that the Secret Service deals with. It's about having a robust protective intelligence program, being able to monitor threats, coming up with a risk assessment for your protectee. So it's very similar to what the government is doing, and there's a lot of organizations within the federal government that also do protection. It's not just the Secret Service. The Diplomatic Security Service has a protective mission. The Marshal Service has a protective mission. And I think there's a lot of very talented folks who have left government that are in the private sector. And so we all kind of speak a similar language. And so when our team goes out and we work with a majority of the Fortune 500 companies, it's always about looking at what is the risk profile of the protectee, what's the risk profile of the organization, what protective intelligence mechanisms do they have in place to monitor some of the threats that are out there, either directed at an individual or the organization or a facility.
And preparation is key here. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on here. But what does an effective executive protection strategy look like in practice?
Well, it's got to be risk-based, and that's the value proposition of the Chertoff Group is when we come in, we work with our partners that are within the security organization of that Fortune 500 company, and we look at what is the risk profile. And sometimes organizations aren't mature or they're nascent, they're just starting out. They've got a burgeoning executive protection program. We help them navigate some of the challenges with developing that risk matrix, looking at travel security, looking at residential security, major events that corporations will often undertake. And so we help them think about it from not only concentric layers of security, but also what are the cyber threats that are out there or the enabling cyber threat vectors that could help somebody carry out an attack or some other, even if it's just a reputational, an embarrassing or, a doxing of sensitive information of the company or the CEO.
And of course, there are a lot of threats that we don't know about because they're not seen. But with the Luigi Mangione trial coming up in September, the murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson will be back in the headlines. And thankfully, most companies will never face an incident as devastating as that one. But when something does go wrong, what separates organizations that recover from those that do not?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, Michelle. That most organizations, the ones that think about security, not just as a line item or something that creates a friction point, but think about it as an enterprise solution, a way to manage continuity of operations, to manage crisis in a time when, God forbid, the unthinkable happens. And so, oftentimes, when we work with organizations, we're also working with them to develop what are your, if something happens to the CEO, and it could just even be something as there's a medical issue and they're out on leave for a while, or who is the next person up. If something happens and the CEO is unable to be reached, what's the succession for leadership of the company, and getting the security leaders to be able to talk about the value that they bring to the organization or the enterprise writ large by talking about this is just, it's not about protecting one person, it's about protecting the brand or the organization and making sure that if it's a publicly traded company, that the stockholders are protected, that there's a plan in place. And oftentimes that those types of plans often fall to the security professionals within the private sector to try to formulate and work with other entities across that enterprise to ensure that if, God forbid, something terrible happens, that there is a plan and that there's a response, and that that plan will decide the outcome of how that organization manages the crisis.
What would you say has changed to make executive protection a strategic priority? And then a follow up to that, do you think most companies are over investing or under investing in this area?
I think what we often try to do with the Chertoff Group is get security leaders to begin thinking about security as a line of business. That it's not just something that just takes away from the bottom line, that there's value added to the organizations, whether it's developing key performance indicators, making sure that you're hitting those, providing metrics to show value to the overall enterprise. That's the critical effort that we try to walk some of these private security leaders through to make sure that they can talk business. Everybody can talk security or talk government if they've come from government, but they have to think differently in the private sector, and they have to start thinking about things in terms of how a CEO would look at it, or how a chief operating officer is going to look at it, and what value that brings to the organization. And remind me, what was your second question?
Yeah, absolutely. So, do you think that most companies are over investing or under investing in the area of executive protection?
So I think, after the United Healthcare incident, there was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. People realized that there was a gap, that unfortunately this tragic event highlighted the need to make sure that you're using a risk-based approach. And what I would say is spending on an executive protection program without having the basics, the building blocks of making sure that you're using protective intelligence, that you have developed a risk matrix, that you have policies in place. Just going out and hiring folks and doing the guards and guns type of approach, that's not going to grow the program. You need those other basic building blocks to develop your program, to get it to a mature operating model, but also to be able to show value to the enterprise. And it goes back to showing those key performance indicators and being able to show value to the enterprise and tying it back into the continuity of operations.
And there are a lot of moving parts here. So, how should organizations align executive protection with mitigating broader business risk?
Sure. So you have to pay attention to various signals, and it's sometimes it's geopolitical, sometimes it's high profile events that put the organization in the news cycle, maybe not in the best light. Sometimes it could be behavior or misconduct by the CEO or by the leaders. So as a security professional, working across to make sure that you're working with perhaps folks that handle the media relations or intergovernmental relations. There could be a very high profile regulatory enforcement that a company is under scrutiny by the federal government for. That could bring negative sentiment. And we've seen that there are certainly there's a lot of vitriol and negative sentiment that is directed at certain sectors within the private sector or certain companies, but there's also this overarching theme that all CEOs are bad and that they're greedy, and sometimes that negative sentiment gets reinforced by folks that are buying into oftentimes erroneous things that are said about companies or CEOs online. And unfortunately, we've seen that even recently where somebody decides that they have a grievance against a particular CEO or against a particular company or a technology, and they start down a pathway towards violence. And so, as a security professional, it's important to have the relationships across the enterprise to understand who in the organization is watching for certain things, making sure that you have that protective intelligence posture in place to monitor not only negative sentiment towards the company or the brand, but also the CEO or perhaps other public facing officials, folks that are on the SEC filings, making sure that you're not just focusing on one particular position, the CEO, because we've seen that if somebody has a grievance against an organization, there is transferability. Sometimes, if there's a target of opportunity to get another public facing official or somebody who is representing the brand at a conference or giving a keynote address, the person who has that grievance, they will try to go after whoever it is that's out there representing the brand. So it's important for those security officials to have relationships across their enterprise, making sure that they've got an excellent protective intelligence program and that they're watching for those signals that are out there.
Where would you say executive protection sits within the broader corporate security function? And then how does that integration support business continuity when a principal is impacted?
Sure. So this is something that we often do when we work with private sector companies. We get that question a lot. Where should security sit? And we often take an agnostic approach to that. It's ultimately it's wherever those security leaders are going to be empowered to make decisions and to be able to affect their plans in the event something happens, whether it's just a CEO retiring and now they have to, lift and shift and move to whoever has been tapped to step into that role. We often say, listen, we come up with various recommendations as to where they should sit, but ultimately it's on that CEO or those leaders to decide. Um, all we ask for is that there's buy-in from the top. And what we've seen is that some of the more successful programs that we've had the opportunity to work with, and sometimes we've had the opportunity to advise them and get them to a position where they can be successful. There's been buy-in at the top. The CEO has said security is a priority. I want to make this a safe place to work. I want to make sure that our leaders are protected, that our employees are protected, our facilities are protected. And so what we find is if there's buy-in at the top, that's when those security leaders have the latitude to make decisions to make sure that they can build their programs, that they can hit those key performance indicators, and that they are in fact empowered to make decisions to enhance and protect the brand of that organization.
We touched on some of the worst case scenarios and also talked about recommendations of what can be done, but I want to take it a step further. What does a mature executive protection program look like today, from staffing to the technology an advanced team relies on?
So it all comes down to people, processes, and technologies. So making sure that you've got the correct amount of people to be able to monitor for threats, check for those signals. If there is a full-time protection program, making sure that you've got the proper number of folks that are trained in executive protection. But it's also about having the processes, having those methodologies to conduct in advance, to have a good, mature travel security program, and extend it not just for the CEO or the executive leadership team, but for associates and employees as they're traveling, whether they're traveling abroad to a manufacturing facility, and making sure that you're providing those folks with, a threat assessment of the country that they may be visiting. And then also having the technologies. There is a wonderful revolution going on right now in security technologies. And a lot of this has been enabled by artificial intelligence. So making sure that they are staying up on what is the latest and greatest, and not chasing shiny objects, right? Being very measured and making sure that you're using products that are that meet what you need today, and allow you to expand a little bit. So a mature program really starts with having the right amount of people, the good policies in place, making sure that you've memorialized those policies, and making sure that you've got those techniques, and then being able to continue to repeat them, and make it a repeatable process.
And I want to get a little personal with a take here. And this is something, Ron, that I know that you have seen firsthand over the years. Executives often experience a protection detail as an intrusion into their family's life before they really see its value. So, how do you get a principal and their family to accept that level of physical security?
Yes, thanks, Michelle. That's a difficult tightrope to walk as a security professional, and one that from my time in government service with the Secret Service, we had to walk a fine line on that. What it comes down to is making sure that you're not creating a friction point for that executive and their family. And it's hard to do, but trust is gained in ounces and lost in buckets. So developing that rapport, showing value, making sure that you're not trying to put them in a gilded cage. At the end of the day, the difference between the private sector and the Secret Service is that the Secret Service has federal law behind it. The president has to be protected. CEOs, you're working to build rapport with them and getting them to agree to want to have protection. And so you have to be able to show value, make sure that you're not working them, too close, being intrusive. But it also comes down to making sure that you've got a good protective intelligence program so that you know what is out there regarding the threat landscape. And if there is a persistent threat or some type of imminent threat, being able to explain that to the principal and say, we received some intelligence that there's a person of interest that is in this city or location, and we're going to work you a little closer today because of that. And they understand that. You don't want to be a distraction to them, but they also have to understand the risk landscape that they're in as well. And that goes a long way with building rapport and trust between the leader and the security professional.
As we're wrapping up here, Ron, any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
No, this has been a great opportunity, Michelle. I appreciate you giving me this chance to kind of highlight some of the things that we do here at the Chertoff Group in working with our Fortune 500 clients.
Ron Rowe, Principal in Security Risk and Resilience at the Chertoff Group, where he leads executive protection and special event security. Ron, thank you so much for your time. A lot of wisdom there and a lot of things to cover. Fortunately, we have some hope there with the preparation so we can avoid all the situations that we spoke of. Thankfully, that we don't see more of them and we can really be prepared. And I appreciate you coming here and giving us your knowledge base there to help companies out there today. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And I want to thank all of you for tuning in and listening to Mission Critical Conversations. Of course, if you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe. And if you'd like to learn more about the Chertoff Group, you can go to thechertoffgroup.com. I've been your host for today, Michele Dawn Mooney. Thanks again for joining us. We hope to connect with you on another podcast soon.